Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Today, we've got takeaways from Week 6 of the NFL season, as well as some big trades, some major wide receiver trades that just came through. Previously, I might have considered this a full episode, but we're just kind of calling it a bonus now, a podcast segment, because it's a whole one overarching theme, and we're just trying to get into more long-form podcasts. But as of today, thank you for tuning in. This is Before we get into the NFL takeaways, there have been some big roster shakeups at the wide receiver position. First of all, Davante Adams is now a New York Jet. Now, when he first voiced his displeasure with the Raiders organization, with the Raiders quarterback situation, I think it was pretty obvious from the jump that, hey, he wanted to go play with A-Rod. And that's exactly what has happened. For the Raiders, you weren't going much of anywhere anyways. So this, not having one of the better wide receivers in the game anymore, that can kind of give you reason to say, hey, now that, we don't have an aging veteran who's still pretty good, near the top of his game, now that you don't have that, you can really commit yourself to a rebuild because you don't want to have Davante Adams and still be a rebuilding team. You kind of want to build around that. But now that he's gone, I think it's time for the Raiders to go into a full rebuild. There's some talent on the defensive end too, like Max Crosby is a stud. However, Max Crosby is not going to fit the timeline of this new rebuild, so maybe he could get shipped off as well. Because the Raiders aren't going anywhere with this roster as it's currently constructed. So I think this is just one domino and there's going to be some others to follow. For the Jets, I'm sure Aaron Rodgers is happy, right? And ultimately, you didn't really mortgage your future too much to build around Rodgers now. You traded away, I believe it was a conditional fourth-round pick that could eventually turn into a second performance-wise. But, you didn't give up too much for Davante Adams. And when New York brought Aaron Rodgers in, the goal was to win now because Rodgers isn't going to be the long-term guy, but you need him to perform at a high level for the next couple of years. And, the season hasn't really got off to how they would necessarily want it to. And Garrett Wilson hasn't quite had the season to this point that I thought he would have. So why not go and add another great wide receiver who we know has really good chemistry with Aaron Rodgers? Not only are they really good on the field when they were back with the Packers, but they also are buddies in real life, right? So, it can kind of keep Aaron Rodgers happy as well. Same thing with a guy like Nathaniel Hackett at OC. Typically, you wouldn't want Hackett after so much of a lack of success in other areas. You wouldn't really want Hackett as your OC, but it keeps Rodgers happy. And at this point, that is what the Jets are trying to do. And so they bring in Davante Adams, and not only does that keep A-Rod happy, but it keeps him in win-now contention. Now, I don't know with the way that this team is currently constructed, with, the firing of Robert Saleh, especially, you don't fire your head coach mid-season and then have high expectations after, right? But with the situation this team is in, I don't know that Super Bowl window is really open. You want it to be with Aaron Rodgers under the helm, but I don't know that it truly is. However, this does help your odds quite a bit by adding Davante Adams. And I saw someone say that, oh, why'd they go and get Davante? They've got Mike Williams already. He's having a good year. Here's the thing, though. Mike Williams is no Davante Adams, right? And Garrett Wilson was drawing double coverage pretty much all season. And that kind of limited his offense because we haven't really seen much progression compared to years past. He was a 1,000-yard wide receiver his first 2 years in the league, playing with bad QBs, and then A-Rod comes in, and we think that's going to be a game changer for Wilson. And stats-wise, it hasn't really been. But teams have been doubling him all the time because they know that he is a threat. But now you can't do that because you got Davante Adams on the other side there, and you've got two wide receivers you got to look out for. So if you got Garrett Wilson fantasy, I don't think it's time to panic. And for Jets fans, room for Garrett Wilson, he's going to have a better year now, I think, just because it's going to open up more opportunities. And same thing for Davante. They can mutually coexist and mutually benefit each other. So overall, I think it is a pretty good, if predictable, move for the Jets. However, just with their current situation, I don't know if it really opens that Super Bowl window back up after a slow start to the year. And, the firing of Robert Saleh. Wide receiver shakeup was Amari Cooper to the Bills. And this is another case of that wide receiver, very talented wide receiver, going from a bad QB situation over in Cleveland to one of the best in Josh Allen and Buffalo. I think Amari especially is a really, really good fit with the Bills after they lost Stephon Diggs. Because while the Bills, they got off to a really good start to begin the year, there were a lot of questions before the season in terms of, their wide receiver depth. Who's Josh Allen going to be throwing this ball to? Because they went and got rid of Stephon Diggs. They wouldn't pay him all that money, right? And it became a situation where Josh Allen is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league, but he doesn't really have that many weapons on the offensive end besides, maybe Dalton Kincaid at the tight end position. Khalil Shakir looks solid, but that's about it, and we don't expect him to take a huge leap as a number one. And, speaking of that, he only had 2 receptions for 19 yards this past game. I do think he'll be better than that. And so for the Bills, you really needed a wide receiver because this is your Super Bowl window. You have Josh Allen playing at an MVP level, and you can make arguments about the turnovers he's had in years past. He's been better about that this year. And, he can, even when he had those turnovers, he can make up for it by just the offensive production he gives you and all the touchdowns combined, right? It kind of zeroes it out. So Josh Allen is a very, very elite quarterback in this league, and he's got to have someone to throw to. And Shakir, he's solid, but he's a lot better number 2 than he is a number 1. And so Amari Cooper's going to be able to come in and be that number 1, and that is only a good thing for the Bills. I think they're 4-2 right now, but their prospects are going to look even better after this trade. Because that 4-2 start, at least for me, was kind of surprising just by virtue of he didn't have the offensive weapons that really Josh Allen would maybe need to let his offensive game do as well as it has in years past. But no, they got off to a really good start, and that's going to be even better with Amari Cooper. I think he's a great fit for the Bills to slot in at that number 1 wide receiver slot. And the Bills could make a run this year. And we say that every year, it seems like, but they consistently have good regular seasons, and then maybe they fall short in the playoffs. But now, this team, as we've seen from the first couple weeks, it's really solid all around. It's not reliant on the Allen to Diggs connection, which was kind of their downfall sometimes in years past. No, you've got a really good core around him, and you just need that one piece to put it all together. And Amari Cooper, they're betting on him to be that guy, and I can absolutely take takeaways from week 6 of the NFL season now. Detroit absolutely dominated the Dallas Cowboys 47-9. Dak Prescott completed 51.5% of his passes for just over 100 yards, not even hitting 200. 0 touchdowns and 2 picks, as well as an 11.5 quarterback rating. This is a guy who is on a 4-year, $240 million contract. And I don't want to get caught up in the money end of it too much because ultimately, pretty much every year, the new quarterback getting a huge extension, that's going to be the highest paid player in the league just because of the salary cap, the way it constantly increases, right? So I don't want to make a big deal out of the contract itself, him making $60 million a year and also having a huge signing bonus. But what I do want to point out is that he is the highest paid player in the entire league right now. And yet, there's a good list of quarterbacks that I would take over him. I would take over Prescott without thinking. For guys that are definitively better, you've got the elite guys like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, A-Rod. At this point, probably Jared Goff, C.J. Stroud, Jordan Love. At this point, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold have had a lot better seasons than Dak has. He was like the 3rd best quarterback in his division, behind Daniels and Hurts, and not Daniel Jones, but still at that point, there's a lot of guys you can list off that are better than him, that have been performing better. Whether it's this season, Brock Purdy as well has stat wise been better, and you can make the argument that Brock Purdy's a system QB, but he's producing more with what he has than Dak Prescott is, and Dak Prescott's got some weapons on the offense too, so you can't really blame him on that either. So the fact that you can name quite a few quarterbacks who either you're more confident in, who are having better seasons, or just are definitively better, you could name a lot of QBs. And Dak Prescott yet is the highest paid player in the entire league. And the Cowboys, you know what? If Dak was just having middling performances and the Cowboys had consistent playoff success, you could excuse it. Because, at the end of the day, every new big extension is going to be the highest paid quarterback in NFL history. But the Dallas Cowboys, they aren't having a lick of success in the postseason either. I talked about Jordan Love a little bit ago. He, in his first year as a starter for the Packers last season, was just as successful in the playoffs as Dak has been his whole career. The Packers went on to lose in the second round to the San Francisco 49ers, and that was a really close game. And the Niners went on to win the Super Bowl. So for Dak, it's not just all the money he's making. It's not just the statistics. It's not just the lack of postseason success. It's a combination of it all that makes it a really bad quarterback situation for the Dallas Cowboys in terms of value to what you're paying. Jordan Love again, he's the first Packer since Brett Favre to have back-to-back home games in Lambeau with 4 or more passing touchdowns. He is absolutely the guy for the Green Bay Packers. Ever since the start of last year, even before the beginning of that season when Love was ready to really be that guy, I had high hopes for him. And he started off that year not too great. But during the second half of the season, he was an elite quarterback. And then that carried over to the postseason until ultimately he had a costly interception against San Francisco that would send that team to the NFC Championship. But then he got the big contract in the offseason. A lot of people were saying, hey, we think Love is overpaid because he had half a great season, right? The first half wasn't too pretty. Second half was amazing. But that first half, right, we have to take it into account the whole year. But Love has shown out to start this year, and he dealt with the injury, but ever since then, that first game, he was underthrown his ball as he didn't look too great. It looked like they rushed him back a week. But by the end of that game, he really ended up being pretty productive, and then ever since, he's been really good. So I think he's absolutely worth that contract, and the Green Bay Packers just get away with yet another generational quarterback. I hate that term, generational. Another franchise quarterback. Because generational, that's more the Mahomes, Tom Brady type. And for the Packers, it's not generational. It's not once in a lifetime. No, it happens. It happens every couple decades. They go from Favre to A-Rod to Jordan Love. So now, in 15 years, if the Green Bay Packers, they go and draft a quarterback in the first round, we'll know to look out. We'll know the league is cooked for another 20 years because, they might stand behind Love for a couple of years and then let him go. And Love's going to be a New York Jet. And it's all just going to be in one big cycle. Shout out to Jordan Love. Shout out to the Green Bay Packers for their quarterback development over the years. This wide receiver position. I want to talk about Chris Godwin because he just had a really good week. The Buccaneers put up 51 points against the New Orleans Saints. And at that wide receiver position for Tampa, Mike Evans, of course, gets a lot of the credit. Baker's going to throw Mike those 50-50 balls. He absolutely trusts Mike, and Mike is going to be able to get there with his insane height and his catch radius. It's hard to guard. But Chris Godwin is super reliable, a guy you can absolutely depend on. He has 511 receiving yards already. I believe he's third in the NFL right now. Chris Godwin is great in his own right, and so Tampa has an amazing wide receiver duo. But Mike Evans gets a lot of the flowers, and that's deservedly so. He is one of the most consistent NFL wide receivers we have ever seen. Without a doubt, a first-ballot Hall of Famer, and him and Baker have some great chemistry. But Baker Mayfield is a very good quarterback, and he's going to throw that to other guys too. And Chris Godwin is another example of that. He was really good when Brady was there as well. And, Godwin's always just been really solid. But especially this year with his 511 receiving yards already, that's really, really showing. I think more people are kind of noticing how good this guy is. He's one of the more underappreciated wide receivers in the past decade in terms of being really good, but not getting much attention, whether that's from the public or from the media. Super dependent, super reliable, maybe not as flashy as Mike Evans in terms of, the catch radius, whatever it might be. But Chris Godwin is the best number 2 wide receiver option in the league. And he could be a number 1 on a lot of teams. Mike Evans, you can make an argument for wide receiver 2s all the time that they're going to perform better just because the wide receiver one draws, defensive tension away from the two. It was like with Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster back in Pittsburgh, and AB said that Juju, the reason he had such a great year in Pittsburgh that year was because of that, and then ultimately Juju's career kind of fell off after that. But for Godwin, my take on it in this situation is this. Yes, Mike Evans is going to draw a lot of that defensive coverage away from Chris Godwin. But at the end of the day, someone has to be able to take advantage of that. And that's what Chris Godwin has done. He takes advantage of the fact that the defense has to key on Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin gets himself open, and Baker delivers him that rock. So for Chris Godwin, Tampa's got two amazing wide receivers. They got one of the best, if not the best, core in the league, especially with Sterling Shepard at the 3. That's a really good receiving core, and they got perhaps the best duo in the entire NFL, and it's all thanks to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And they got the perfect QB to deliver them that ball too. Next up is Sam Darnold finally coming back to earth for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, they had a bye week this week to allow the guys to kind of rest and recuperate, especially for Sam Darnold. But the week before that, and I don't want to harp on them too much for one bad performance, especially because the New York Jets, they have a really good defense, especially against the pass. But Darnold completed 14 of his passes, just 14 of them, for 179 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 pick. And it kind of looked like, a flash of what we had seen from Darnold in years past. So often flashes, when we talk about them in sports, they're used to relate to something good. How we can really see, old Derrick Rose in his Minnesota Timberwolves revival, right? Something like that. But flashes can show up the other way too. And this looked like an old Sam Darnold game. However, he has a lot of weapons around him, whether it's Justin Jefferson, whether it's Jordan Addison, whether it's Hawkinson when he finally gets healthy. Darnold has a lot of weapons around him. That's something that he always kind of struggled to deal with, right? He, with the Jets, they didn't build around him very well. And he's finally in a good situation. Kevin O'Connell, as well, is a really, really good head coach. So Darnold's in a situation to succeed, and he had a bad week, but I think he is absolutely going to recover. Now, is he going to continue the MVP trajectory that he was on from weeks 1 to 4? I don't know, because that's a top quarterback in the league level of play. But for Sam, I think he has really proven himself that he has what it takes to be a starting quarterback in this league. And I was a Sam Darnold doubter myself, but he's absolutely proven himself. And shout out to Sam Darnold for kind of just reviving his career. It started off with the Jets. That was a really bad stint. Then he went to the Panthers. He was fighting with Baker for the job back when Baker also wasn't playing very well. Then he was a backup for a little bit, and now he's with the Vikings, and he's in a great situation, and he's making the most of it. And you can't fault him for that, because even if he has guys like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, he's still got to get the ball to them. And we see it with a guy like Desmond Ridder for the Falcons last year, even Taylor Heineke. They had weapons like Drake London, like Kyle Pitts, like Bijan to dump it off to, and they were not able to make the most of it. That's why Ridder got benched in the first place, is because, he had all this talent around him, but he couldn't do anything with it. Sam Darnold, at the bare minimum, can distribute the ball to his playmakers. And so even that deserves some praise. Sam Darnold has absolutely turned his career around, and I think he's going to be just fine despite one bad week. And he is the Minnesota Vikings quarterback moving forward, at least for this season. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him and J.J. McCarthy, because Darnold at this rate is kind of on pace to take McCarthy's job. But, McCarthy at this point might be perceived as having higher upside. But Darnold, wherever it is, whether it's in Minnesota or elsewhere, he has solidified his spot as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And it is just a great story of redemption. That is all for today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. In the coming days, we're hopefully going to have that Derrick Rose biography, documentary, whatever you want to call it out. But until then, thank you for listening. It has been State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts.